The first question I have is about fracking. The issue that polarized Gates Mills most last year was a proposed Bill of Rights that, among other things, would ban fracking essentially in the village. We'll start with you, Mr. Belson. What did you think of the Bill of Rights, and what should the village do about potential deep well fracking?
The Bill of Rights was a response to a proposal by the mayor to have a program where the village would pool their land with other members of the village in a trust. Mm-hmm. And some people thought that was inviting drilling into the village rather than controlling it. And the reaction to that was the fracking ban that was included in the Bill of Rights. Others, more recently, have proposed a charter amendment that would be someplace kind of in the middle that would allow voters to decide rather than either one of these two extremes. And that's the current 2015 charter amendment that will be on the ballot in November. Mm-hmm.
And you helped draft that?
Yes, I was on the committee for that amendment and was one of the authors of that particular charter amendment.
Okay, so Ms. Turner, what do you think the village should do about potential fracking? There is no hydraulic fracturing in the village as of now. There are vertical wells, but no horizontal wells. So what do you think the village should do about potential horizontal wells?
That's a great question for me, since I've been co-chairing our regional commission for exploration and study with regard to oil and gas drilling. That commission was started by the village council in January, and its intent was to bring together disparate voices, people who are environmentalists, engineers, scientists, elected officials, educators, to educate us about the various issues related to deep well horizontal fracking. It's been just a terrific experience. Chip has served as our communications chair for that commission, and we are now preparing some final recommendations that will be available and promoted early in the year, early in 2016, with some recommendations for next steps. As an individual from Gates Mills, I would say personally, I like everyone I know in the village is not interested in horizontal fracking. The intent of the commission was to find ways and recommendations to address safety and health, and for any community in the greater region who is interested in gas well drilling, that they would have some options for doing that in a safe way. And for communities like ours that are not interested at all, we were hoping to come up with some legal ways to at least interrupt the process, which unfortunately the state has taken away all of our local control.
Okay, Mr. Auwerter?
First of all, when I introduced myself, I said my name is Jay Auwerter. My nickname is Chip, which Sandra just referred to me as, but on the ballot I am Jay Auwerter. So I'm going to answer the broader question. I am opposed to horizontal drilling in a densely populated community like the village. The village is zoned for residential purposes, as are most densely populated communities, and horizontal drilling is an industrial activity. The state legislature has put in a lot of measures that make it, that facilitate the ability to drill for the drilling companies. We've worked very hard on the regional commission to come up with ways that we feel can bring much more local control legally to control or prevent drilling in a village like, or a community like Gates Mills. With regard to issue 51 last fall, which was the beginning of your question, that did not deal with drilling. It dealt with community rights that went way beyond drilling and was an extreme radical overreach to anything that would be appropriate. And it was soundly defeated and is not in favor of most anybody in the village. So it wouldn't have stopped drilling at all. It would have raised a lot of lawsuits, as a community bill of rights like that have done in other communities. They have brought about lawsuits that have cost communities a lot of money. So not in favor of that at all.
Okay, so Council President. Turner, did you want to take a minute for follow-up?
Yes, I would just add that I was not in favor of issue 51. I worked against that, and am very pleased that it was defeated. You mentioned something key in your question, and that was that that issue would have banned fracking, and it would not have done that. And that's what was posed to the residents, but was misleading because it would not have banned fracking. It's much more complex than that, and our voters were able to see that and voted it down 70% to 30%.
So why wouldn't it have banned fracking? I mean, I think that was one of the goals of the Bill of Rights, is to give residents a decision whether or not they wanted fracking to come in there. So can you, sure, you can
Sure.
explain that if you know the answer.
Yeah, the answer is that in 2004, the state legislature took over the rules, basically, and the regulations for fracking. And I would say, except for Gates Mill's own property. In other words, the state law, no one at the state level, and no state law compels us to violate our own zoning laws, which actually are on the books, and they ban fracking in Gates Mills. So Gates Mills itself and its council have voted to have gas wells in place. In 2008, I guess it was, we have 3. And they just bought a gas well in July. And again, nothing is compelling us to violate our violate our own zoning ordinances. So this new charter amendment recognizes that. And in a sense, it's not a ban, but it's allowing voters to decide whether to have fracking on village-owned property.
Okay, Mr. Auwerter?
Well, that isn't what issue 51 was about, and it really didn't address it. It actually cast us illegally against the state laws and would have cost us a tremendous amount to ban. But issue 56, the charter amendment that's being proposed, is a whole different kettle of fish, and I'm also opposed to that.
Okay. So that leads me to my next question. Mr. Belson, why don't you explain the charter amendment that you have helped draft and circulate petitions for, and Council President Turner and Mr. Auwerter, why don't you tell us what you think about that? So,
And let me just correct you, I'm a council member.
Okay.
Karen Schneider, who is our running for mayor unopposed, is our current council president.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, the amendment is based on the concept that extraordinary things are happening with fracking. It can bring great wealth to the village, and it can bring great harm to the village. And that's what the commission is going to describe in their report. And having said that, the amendment recognizes that within the village land itself, that's an opportunity to display best practices, I'll say, because we control the land in the village and the state does not, in a sense. So anyway, this amendment simply says when council passes an ordinance that has a modification or a new lease for horizontal fracking, it does not become effective until it is approved by the voters. And that was last done in 1995. It was an extraordinary year when a city water program was established for Gates Mills. Council passed an ordinance. We had a charter amendment at that time, same language as this one, and it became effective when the voters approved it. So this ordinance is neither pro-fracking or anti-fracking. It's simply saying the voters get to determine whether something of this magnitude that will change the character of our village potentially. That's the core of it.
Okay.
Couple of responses. One, issue 56, like issue 51, misled voters to thinking that this was a way to ban fracking. Again, it's much more complex than that, and state law controls the pooling and unitization and the drilling process. So simply saying that the voters would have the opportunity to ban fracking is, again, very misleading.
It never says that.
And it presents an opportunity. People can vote for or against fracking as as is mentioned in issue 56. What it does, however, it creates the opportunity, actually, for fracking that does not currently exist by having the charter changed such that by a vote of the electorate, there could be horizontal drilling, which does not exist now. One of the things that we're attempting to promote through the Regional Commission are enhancement of zoning regulations that would provide for greater regulation over health and safety of any industrial process. So it would exclude any type of industrial practice, which we all would agree includes horizontal fracking. So there are many other issues that are problematic with 56 that maybe Chip can get into, but again, I'm not supporting that issue either.
Okay.
Okay, with regard to issue 56, number one, I think it's totally unnecessary. There isn't a shred of evidence that any current or past council member has ever been in favor of horizontal drilling. I don't think it's appropriate to tie the hands of village council on issue specifics. And the issue on the water was a one-time thing and is not appropriate for something like this. More importantly, there's likely to be very unintended consequences, and we have one that's actually taking place right now. Had issue 56 been in place, it would have had the exact opposite effect. The village is trying to buy a 10-acre parcel along with the Land Conservancy with the intent of putting a pumping station on that property. By doing so, it will save the village approximately $100,000 each year, so it's a very significant event. On that property is a vertical gas well. When that was brought to council's attention, Sandra Turner was in attendance. I was observing council that night. From our work on the Regional Commission, we knew instantly that we needed to dig into the lease on that property. We did that and found that it did have the opportunity to turn that into a horizontal well. We've worked with Bass Energy and have reached agreement to an amendment to stop that. And had the issue 56 been approved and in place, that transaction would have never gone through, and that well would be sitting there with the opportunity of the owner to turn it into a horizontal well. So there's an example of exactly the opposite effect, unintended consequence that isn't being foreseen in this charter amendment.
Okay, Mr. Belson, did you want to take a minute for follow-up?
Sure. I was at that meeting, and I was actually the person that sat as a resident, not as a council member. And when council reviewed that particular ordinance, I sat there and said, when are they going to talk about what's in the lease? You know, they're inheriting a lease from an existing well. And we all know that the 3 leases that the village currently owns have a clause in them that prohibits horizontal fracking. It's in the current leases. So here we're about to acquire a 4th lease, and as a member of the public, I cannot participate in the conversation. I'm just listening. And they did 2 things that were unusual. One, they suspended the rule allowing public debate. That rule was suspended. And then they took a vote, and they took a vote without any of them, well, I'll just say without anyone commenting on the lease. After the vote, I was able to ask the question, did anyone read the lease? Did anyone see that clause? And no one was able to say, yes, we read the lease, and that clause is in there. That's the crux of what really happened.
Okay.
I'd just like to make a comment about the process. There are many times that the council will suspend the rules for an emergency legislation. It does not prevent speaking on the issue, and we did have the opportunity to speak on the issue that night. It merely suspends the need to have the issue raised at 3 different meetings. So people in the audience did have the opportunity.
I also attended that meeting. That meeting authorized the mayor to proceed to negotiate the contract. It's not done. It's not been signed yet. It's still in the works. Charles would like to take credit that he brought it up. Sandra and I were also very aware of that from all the work on the commission. So this wasn't a one-man effort that he didn't save the village from that, nor did he come up with a solution at all. We've come up with the solution by working with Bass Energy, and it will not be a horizontal well. That would have been immediately obvious to anybody dealing with the details. which weren't finalized at that point when it was brought up. So there's no hero here. The point of the matter is that's an example of why council is prudent on these things, and we don't need a charter amendment to tie the hands of council.
Well, if we don't have the charter amendment, in the future, someone like me might not be in the audience, and someone like you might not be able to assist to change the lease so that you insert that particular amendment, that particular
and again, had there been a charter amendment, this whole deal wouldn't have gone through. There'd have been a lease there that would have remained the risk of horizontal, and the village wouldn't have gotten the benefit of the 100,000 savings. So that's the absolute opposite effect of what they're trying to do with the charter amendment.
Okay, we can get to that at the end of the debate when you have
Okay.
10 minutes to speak to each other. My next question is, what did you think of Mayor Sean Riley's suggested land trust to basically pool property to have negotiating power if a driller were to come in and attempt to build a horizontal well on village property? So why don't we start with you, Mr. Auwerter?
You know, I wasn't a member of council. I wasn't following that at that point in time. This was early last calendar year, 2014. I've talked with Mayor Riley many times about it. I think it got greatly misconstrued as to what the intent was. Actually, one of the likely conclusions from the Regional Commission is going to center around conservation easements. Probably not anything close to a land trust, but that was one of the actual intents underneath that land trust idea. The intent was never to promote drilling. In fact, it broken down into detail. That, or more likely a specific conservation easements, might be the most effective step that we can take in a densely populated community like Gates Mills to prevent horizontal drilling. So I think it was greatly misconstrued, and it caused a small group who had good intent, because they and most other residents don't want to see horizontal drilling. So I don't begrudge anybody trying to go down the path. It just got taken over by people outside the state and turned into a much, much more radical proposal. So it really went off on a tangent. I think with the council, I think, realized that and appointed the Regional Commission, which Sandra has co-chaired. And I think we're really getting to a good solution to this issue.
So were you in favor of the land trust?
I didn't study it, so I can't comment specifically. I am in favor of the idea of conservation easements. So
Okay.
I think that should work. So.
Okay, Ms. Turner?
I think the issue of fracking has been a concern in the region for a long time, and there have been different approaches and discussions. This is yet another one. I think the idea of the land trust was to open a dialogue among residents about ways to conserve and preserve our property. I'd have to say that it was a terrible launch. And the idea was presented at a community meeting, and I think people were looking for solutions rather than to be presented, as opposed to this being, a forum for discussion and interested parties would get involved. So I would say that to your question of was I for it or against it, I was certainly for the discussion, but there never was a proposal upon which we as a council got to vote. It really got thwarted very early in the process.
Okay, Mr. Belson, what
Sure.
did you think about the land trust?
Well, I think that any land trust that uses village land as part of the core to start out, which the mayor did talk about in terms of control of this land trust, that the village would be able to be in a position to help control that. I think that's shaky ground, literally. Like I said, there's great wealth and there's great harm, and I don't think the village of Gates Mills should be the test case for determining whether it will be great harm or great wealth. I think that we should stay out. The village itself should stay out, village-owned land, and that is something for members, like they do now. If they want to put in a shallow well, it's private property. It's ruled by the state, the state regulation. But I think, personally, I think it would be a mistake to do that. Minimally, the new amendment would say, it's not my view that matters, it's the collective view of the entire village, and council has the responsibility to be able to describe the land trust so that it doesn't get off to a rocky start, but in a very specific and understandable way for the voters, and they vote on it. That's my view, that it's not that complex, or if it is so complex that it can't be explained to the voters, then it shouldn't go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Auwerter, did you want to take a minute to follow up to respond to anything that?
Yeah, just a couple of more things on a charter amendment. Putting a charter amendment on the ballot, therefore having to go to the voters for something like that, is costly to the village. This charter amendment could cost the village as much as $10,000 this year. Last year, issue 51 cost the village, it's estimated at close to $20,000. These are not small undertakings. And for example, if we would have to go to the voters for this 10-acre parcel that we're trying to change the lease on, that would have added an expense to that and an extended period of time, all of the ups and downs. It's just not necessary. There is no predisposition in the village to turn this into horizontal drilling. So not in favor of that.
I would just add that a charter amendment is a significant action on the part of a community, and the folks that are proposing issue 56 never convened any community meetings to discuss the charter amendment. There was no invitation to people who had a different point of view to come and talk about the unintended consequences. Any of the communications about issue 51 were just people receiving the petition to sign, and then media coverage and a couple of emails. That's not the way that I would propose to go about doing something as serious as that.
I would just follow up with one quick question. I appeared, as did others who support this idea, in May and June at the council meeting, brought it up thinking that you all might adopt this in the same way that you did the water, that council adopted the charter amendment for city water 20 years ago. And you had no response, at those meetings. There was a public discussion of this concept. And after 2 or 3 months of no response from council whatsoever, after bringing it up at the council meetings, we decided the next step would be to put it as a charter amendment sponsored by the public rather than sponsored. As for cost, I contacted the director of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, and he said the costs relating to this particular issue are negligible. He said there would be costs if we had to advertise, but there are none. All the costs you're referring to, the fact that the village lawyers up and uses its consultants, those are the costs. These are village costs for lawyering, just like the regional committee has. I don't know, in the first 6 months, you had $12,000 of expenses, of which $8,000 are about lawyer fees.
Okay,
Wow.
I'm sorry to cut you guys off. We can get to that at the end of the debate, but we have to move on to the next question.
Absolutely false.
Okay, how do you feel about the less invasive vertical wells the village has now, and do they affect quality of life in the village? Ms. Turner, we'll start with you.
The village has 47 wells. Currently, many of them have been there historically for years. The fact that House Bill 278 was passed in 2004, which allowed for state control and not local control over drilling, did increase the number of wells. There have not been any wells drilled in the village since 2009. We have an excellent fire department who receives any notices when there might be an issue. There have been a few incidents over the years. Personally, that's how I got involved in council to begin with, because I would see these wells in town and wonder how that could be. So personally, I don't support them, but I think they've been profitable for some people in the community. The village has wells, and it has allowed for us to obtain royalties of over $1 million and save about $35,000 a year on natural gas expenses. So it's a complex issue, and there's many sides and many opinions.
Okay, Mr. Belson?
The shallow wells are so much different from the deep well horizontal fracking. It's a multiple of 10 times more water, 10 times more injection required for the larger ones. So they're really not comparable. I would say from the village point of view, again, my idea, or the idea that people think that the village is different than private property, it sets an example, best practices. All the people look up to the village. I think that when the village puts in these horizontal wells on its own property, it's violating the basic principles of its own zoning. And that, to me, is a disconnect between the village's own zoning, which bans it. Again, as Chip said, it's not an industrial town. Zoning rules it out. And yet the village has approved 3 and just bought another one, 4, or is in the process of negotiating a 4th. And as long as they have what Ned Hill, who gave a talk to all of us last year at this time, as long as they're what he called good leases, that they prohibit deep well fracking, horizontal fracking, that's fine. But once they don't have that specific line, in the lease, and they permit future horizontal fracking, it's a big problem.
Do you think the 47 vertical wells affect quality of life in the village? And if so, how?
Well, there's a potential for great harm. We know in other villages that they have blown, in Bainbridge, other places. The fire chief says it wasn't his decision, but the well that's right next to the river, the tennis court, the fire department, and the police department, you couldn't pick a worse spot for a well if there was ever a problem. It would just shut down the entire control center of our village. So, these are big issues that cannot be resolved by having a bill come in quickly, sign it. Well, we're in a rush to do it. All of these things need time, and the charter amendment provides that for the future.
Okay, Mr. Auwerter, how do you feel about the vertical wells, and do they affect quality of life in the village?
Well, first to clarify, a vertical well, particularly in the context of the geology of the village, goes down about 3,000 feet typically, whereas a horizontal well, horizontal drilling well, goes down about 8,000 to 10,000 feet. A vertical well may go out at the bottom a little bit directionally, but not very far, whereas a horizontal well goes down 8,000 to 10,000 feet and then can go out parallel to the surface as far as 2 miles. So it is a radically different approach, as Charles indicated. One of the things that we've learned on the Regional Commission with regard to vertical wells is that how they're constructed and how the installation is supervised, the quality of the outfit doing the drilling, et cetera, is of paramount importance. And when you hear stories about vertical wells not going well, it's pretty much probably been not particularly reputable drilling companies. I believe everything I understand that the village used very good, reputable companies when they did that. So there's a risk in a lot of things that can be done. I'm not fundamentally opposed to the vertical wells. Obviously, on private property, we have no control over that. I don't foresee getting any of that kind of control. I do think the village getting $1,300,000 in benefit over the last 10 years is an interesting decision, but I wasn't part of the decision to begin with, but I'm not fundamentally opposed to it.
Okay, we'll take a minute for follow-up. Ms. Turner?
Just to clarify, the village has no horizontal wells. You misspoke, and I just wanted to correct that. We have vertical wells. You said we had horizontal wells. We have vertical wells.
Yeah, we have the vertical wells, which none of them have the ability, though, to become horizontal wells because they have a clause in the lease that says it's not allowed. If you wanted to do it, you'd have to renegotiate it.
Exactly.
And that's why we have the charter amendment, because there's a concern that, well, next month that lease might be changed and that clause deleted. And if that were to happen, and especially given the example of the Hayes property, where the current lease that you inherited has a clause in it that does not prevent.
They haven't inherited it yet, Charles. Let's get off of that. They have not inherited it. They're not going to inherit it without that amendment.
I'm talking about on the 12th of July, when council voted to approve the ordinance.
They didn't vote to approve. You voted the negotiations to proceed.
Well, they authorized the mayor. It's
to negotiate.
It's 1215-17. They authorized the mayor to negotiate it at a specific price.
Right.
And At that moment, yeah, at that moment, the lease in place, and the minutes say, the mayor says that it doesn't matter what the lease says. You can go, the minutes for that, it's public record. You can go, it doesn't matter what the lease says. If it allows for horizontal drilling, then we're going to have horizontal drilling. If it doesn't.
Okay, I'm sorry to cut you off. Mr. Auwerter, did you want to take a minute for follow-up, and then we need to move on to the next question?
Just all I know is the process is, since that was brought up to council, the mayor's actually been the one that's worked on the amendment, and it's been properly addressed, and so I don't know what the process would have been otherwise, except that it's all going to be a very good solution. So, again, I just think horizontal is drastically different. I'm not opposed to horizontal drilling in a rural community or a community that wants to see that, but I just don't see communities that are densely populated and residentially zoned that don't want to see it. I don't like to see it imposed. We're working very hard on a lot of other aspects of what's going on at the state level. I'm meeting with state senators and people that have influence down there to see if we can deal with some of the other issues that are in front of the Senate this fall, and just to bring more control. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see some progress.